I won't say I'd always dreamed of babysitting. I have, but I won't say it. It probably had to do with the fact that as a child I was absolutely in love with my babysitter. We played so many games and had so much fun that sometimes I'd have my parents invite her over just so we could hang out. So when I was old enough to be a babysitter, I actively searched for babysitting jobs. I wanted to be that cool aunt to someone. It was some sort of fantasy for me. However, a year into my babysitting career, as it were, I'd already lost motivation. It was only a source of money for me, and most times I just scrolled the internet while keeping one eye on the kid I was supposed to babysit. Well, my one-eye policy went absolutely great for me until I met this family. Now, the Shawns had just moved into the town a month before, and they were finding it a bit difficult to adjust. Mr. Shawn was a real estate developer, and he was usually out of town on weekdays. Mrs. Shawn was an investment banker, and she often came home late. They had only one kid, a small, bright boy of 7 named Tommy. Now, as far as kids go, Tommy wasn't terrible. I'd babysat him a few times before, and he wasn't a terrible kid. He'd never groan when I gave him vegetables, and while he did love watching cartoons, he never threw a tantrum if I wanted to see something else. It was less than I could say for many other children. Let's just say babysitting for the Shawns wasn't the worst thing in the world. One day after school, I got a call from the Shawns. They wanted me to babysit for a while. Apparently Mrs. Shawn had an overflow of work and wouldn't be able to get home on time. When I got to their house, Tommy was keeping himself busy with crayons. Very soon it became late, and I began to consider putting Tommy to bed. That's when I noticed something quite odd. The light on the porch. For some reason, it was flickering. I tried to go out and check what was happening, and that's when I discovered that the door was locked. I tried as much as I could, but it just wouldn't budge. In fact, I used my keys, but it still wouldn't budge. For a while, the porch light stopped flickering, and I went back to sit down. Perhaps I'd spoiled the lock if something like that could happen. When the Shawns returned, they would fix this. The next moment, I heard a crashing sound. Someone had thrown a brick through the glass window. My first instinct was to run, and indeed I was already on my way upstairs, but I couldn't leave Tommy there. I went down, carried him, and ran upstairs. I found Tommy's parents' room and locked myself and Tommy in it. Tommy was quite upset and started crying. I had to clamp his mouth shut with my hands. Downstairs, I could hear the door opening. Someone was in the house. I texted Mrs. Shawn to start coming home, and I called the police. The woman I spoke to said that a police car would be in the area in 10 minutes. I continued to hear footsteps, and I could feel my heart beating at 1,000 beats per second. That's when I saw it. Right across the room was a window. It was open, and right on the other side was a tree. A plan started to form in my head. I could easily leave the house through the window. It was feasible. I would put Tommy out first, get him to hang onto the branch long enough, and I would follow after him. It was a foolproof plan. As I was thinking of escaping, I heard footsteps on the staircase. This was getting serious. As the first step landed on the doorway, I sprung into action. I ran to the window, opened it, and put Tommy on the ledge outside. He was pretty scared, but he was an athletic kid and was able to grab a branch and balance on it. It was my turn next, and I could hear footsteps right outside the door. When the first hit came, it was jarring, but it accelerated my actions. I was on the branch before I knew it, and I was climbing down. Apparently, Tommy was a great climber and had climbed down before me. When I got down, I grabbed him and ran out onto the street. I saw a police car coming, and we stopped the vehicle. The policeman ran into the house to investigate, and I was shocked when they said they found nothing. Sure, the brick was still in the living room, but aside from that, nothing else was found. In any case, that was the last day I babysat anyone. Kids are wonderful, right? Right? Well, I used to think so too. In fact, I was such a great believer in this that I even started to enjoy babysitting, something that most of my friends didn't like or look on kindly. However, my upbeat attitude about babysitting didn't quite stand the test of time. If you're wondering what happened, well, here it is. I was babysitting for a couple on a date. They had triplets named John, James, and Diane. These kids were about 8 years old, and as you expect, they were at the peak of naughtiness. Of the 3 kids, only Diane liked me. John merely tolerated my presence, and James irrevocably hated my guts. It didn't bother me in any case, and I didn't think too much of it until this day. While sitting in the living room minding my business as James and John battled themselves on a video game, I heard a banging sound. It was like someone threw something off the top of the house, or something rolled off the top of the house. It was pretty dark, but I wasn't scared. This was a good neighborhood, at least that's what I thought until I went outside. I went around the back, and what I saw is something that I can never forget. It looked like a parcel, but it was entirely unlike one. It was wrapped in a white sheet and tied with a rope. It had red stains all over it, and when I gathered the courage to touch it, it was warm. Right then, all of the lights in the house went out. Well, that was strange, I thought. I went back into the house and found that I couldn't find the kids. I'd just left Diane at the dining table, and I was pretty certain that I'd left James and John playing video games. But for some reason, I couldn't find them. I soon began to sweat and shout. I searched all of the house, but I couldn't find them. My first thought, of course, was that this was all an elaborate prank. As I was walking about with my flashlight, I looked up and saw a hatch in the ceiling of the hallway. I always knew that this house had an attic, but I never quite knew how to access it. I'm pretty tall, so I was able to simply jump and pull the hatch down. I got a chair and climbed into the attic. As I expected, crouched in a corner were 3 children. "Did you see it?" "See what?" I replied. "The man," they said. "The man with the broken face," they replied. I laughed out loud. What a stupid prank, I thought. Their imagination was probably messing with them. Lighting up the house with candles would definitely improve the mood, and so I came down, and just as I was dropping to the ground, I felt the hairs on my neck. Right there in front of me was a middle-aged man with thin hair and pale skin. He looked like a ghost and was wearing rags. Just as he raised his hands to do whatever he was going to do to me, I dropped him like a bag of potatoes to the ground. I scrambled up to the attic where I called the police and the triplets' mom. When the police came, they found evidence of a forceful break-in at the back door. Not only that, but they also discovered that someone had messed up the switch box. That's why our lights went off. This ghost-like man was never caught. One of the scariest nights of my life happened when I was babysitting my step-siblings. I was back home from college for the summer, and my mom thought that the best use of my time would be to babysit a 12-year-old. Now, get me right, I'm not saying that babysitting is a huge waste of time, but at that point in my life, it was nothing more than a huge waste of time. But I would be back to college in any case, and it was my best interest to do the job and leave it at that. And that's what I did for 3 days a week. The night before I was to leave for college was my last babysitting gig. I was feeling rather pleased with myself, and right there in a corner was Connor, my stepbrother. Now, Connor doesn't talk too much. He usually only speaks when spoken to and was often by himself. That night I was babysitting Connor as usual when a huge storm started. It was raging. I checked the news and they were calling it the biggest thunderstorm of the decade, whatever that meant. Connor didn't even seem fazed by any of this. He continued to draw in his book. I got bored and walked up to him to check what he was drawing. What I saw implanted an image that I'll never forget in my memory. It was a bit amateurish, but it was this image of a wind that had ferocious eyes. The same image was drawn all over his textbooks, and to make things even creepier, he'd written strange text near the drawings. I asked where he got the drawings from, and he said some were from his mind and others were from the woman. "What woman?" I asked. "The woman in the closet," he said. "There's a woman in the closet?" "Yes," Connor replied. "But I'm not supposed to tell anyone." "So why are you telling me?" I asked Connor. "Because you asked nicely," he said. At this point, I was pretty spooked, but I was curious. I left Connor at the table doing whatever he was doing and went upstairs. I certainly didn't expect to find some woman living in the closet, but it wasn't something that my mind didn't entertain. As I entered Connor's room, a putrid smell hit me. What in God's name could be smelling like that as I fumbled for the lights? As I switched the light on, I felt the shock of my life. Right there on the bed was a woman with tattered clothes, no shoes, and a hairdo that seemed crazy. The figure stood up, and before I knew what was happening, she ran towards me. I took myself out of the way and expected her to fall flat as she tried to grab air, but she didn't. She ran out of the room and went down for Connor. She grabbed him fast as lightning and flew out the window. Before I could say a word or do anything, I felt a tap on my shoulder. As I turned back to look, it was a black male with dreadlocks, chains, and a beard, and the same tattered clothes that the woman had been wearing. Before I could process what was happening, this man had slashed at me twice. The third time the knife came, I kicked it out of his hands. The man, shocked that we are now on equal footing, took one look around the house and jumped out of the window, glass and all. Connor was eventually found at a bus stop. The woman was never found, and the man who jumped out of the window got to the ER with a long shard of glass screwed tightly into his stomach.